Hey guys, Triple B here with the new set Paldea Evolved coming out. Put together a bit of a buy list as the cards that I'm going to be looking into getting for this set, and if you're having some doubts onto what to get for yourself, should give you a little bit of a hand. It's going to cover cards that are going to be staples in all decks that I recommend everybody picking up, as well as some cards where it's more so specific to certain decks, and some stuff that I think will have some potential in the future. So if you want to buy all these cards, I'll have a list of everything at the end, or if there's just a couple of pieces where you're like, what's going to be good for the meta? Like, what do I need to build decks? Don't worry, I got you covered. So to start off, we're going to cover the staple cards for this set, or at least what I think are the staple cards. Going to be going after 2 copies of Squawkabilly EX. It's a great card. Just on the first turn, discard your hand, draw until you have 6 cards. You can cheat it out with Nest Ball, Battle VIP Pass, just starting it. It's just a great way to draw a lot of cards. We're also going to be including the Mimikyu, which is effectively invincible into Pokemon EX and Pokemon V. Can just be a very handy tool to be able to include in decks, just to buy yourself a little bit of time, or potentially just stall decks out if you know they don't have anything that can shred through it. We've also got 2 copies of the Spiritomb. Its ability is going to just completely shut off abilities of basic Pokemon V. So Luminions and Genesect V are the main ones this is going to be going after. It's just a helpful way to be able to effectively shut off Mew without having to run Path to the Peak. So decks like Lugia or Arceus builds, it could be an interesting inclusion to have in there just to completely shut off your opponent without shooting yourself in the foot. Also going to be including the Luxray. It's got a great ability that if you're behind on prize cards, you can just bench this Pokemon. It's a stage 2, so normally you wouldn't be able to do that, and it's a great way to just kind of cheat it out. Its attack for lightning and double colorless energy is going to do 180 damage, which you can easily play with the new energy card, Reversal Energy, that effectively has the same ability as Luxray. If you're behind in prizes, this card's going to activate, and it's going to count as 3 Rainbow Energy, so easily pays the attack cost of the Luxray. Hits weakness into some pretty relevant things, being able to one-shot into Lugia V-Star, as well as water Pokemon. Got Chin-Pao coming out in this set, which means we might be seeing a comeback of cards like Palkia V-Star to kind of help that out. So just having a consistent way to one-shot them if they do start to take the swing in prizes and do it with a single prize Pokemon, it's going to be very helpful. Also including 2 copies of Giacomo. It's a supporter card that you play it and you can discard a special energy from each of your opponent's Pokemon. Lugia, we just mentioned it. If they're spreading out energy to set up multiple attackers, you can punish them. Same with Mew. If we can see they've got Fusion Strike energy across multiple guys, just discard them all. They got like a Meloetta and a Mew being set up, just gone, nah, that's okay. Those are gone now. Definitely an interesting supporter card and could be pretty helpful. Have it in here as 2 copies, likely just be a one-off index, but if you're really concerned, having it as 2 is very helpful, and I can't see it being a very expensive one, so if it's like a 50-cent supporter, picking up 2 copies isn't going to hurt the bank. Are going to be looking at 4 copies of the new supporter card Iono though. This one might be a little bit tricky to get your hands on, especially at launch. A lot of people are going to want full playsets. A lot of people are going to want multiple playsets because they're going to be running it as 4 OBS in multiple decks. It lets you just shuffle your hand into your deck and draw a card for each prize card you have remaining, you and your opponent. So it's a disruption and draw power all in one card. So instead of having to wait on something like Roxanne till later in the game, you can just be using Iono. Is a little bit tricky though, because essentially early in the game, you could be helping your opponent out, but later into the game, if you can put them down to a 1-card hand and they just need a boss for game, you're making their life really difficult. It's a great comeback card and it's going to see a lot of play. Stadium card Artisan, I hope I'm saying that right. Let me know in the comments down below if I'm not, but it just lets you bench a basic Pokemon from your deck. That's solid. Great way to get set up. Helps out both players though, so do keep in mind it is a stadium card. It's for you, it's for your opponent, but the fact that you can be triggering it every single turn, it's just like, hey, I have a Nest Ball in play. That's great, and I can't see any deck that wouldn't want to include this. Obviously, deck space becomes limited. You're going to be running counter stadiums, things like Path to the Peak will still be seeing quite a bit of play. Artisan being able to bump that out, so it could help yourself out while helping yourself set up. It's great, but also do be mindful it will be helping your opponent. Similar to Iono, there's going to be situations where it's a bit of a blessing, it's a bit of a curse. All of the special energies coming out in this set, though, I'm going to recommend picking up. So Jet Energy, when you attach it to one of your bench Pokemon, you just pop it into the active. It's effectively a switch and a way to charge things up. Interesting inclusion for decks like Lost Box, where you're going to be running multiple switching cards and you usually use energy to discard to retreat. I could see that being included in there. Obviously, basic energy is normally the way it wants to go, so maybe it's like a 2-off in there, but with these special energies, always going to recommend picking up a playset of them, as well as stadium cards. The stadiums in this set are a little bit hit and miss, so the other ones aren't on this page as staples, but I would still recommend getting them as 2-offs. Luminous Energy, though, it's effectively the new copy of Rainbow Energy. Trade-off being you can only have one special energy attached to that Pokemon to have the effect trigger. So it's going to count as every single energy, but only one at a time. Any other special energy, though, it's just a colorless. So you'd be using this in a DTE to try and pay Luxray. It's not going to work. It's just going to be 3 colorless energy at that point. Reversal Energy, we already covered talking about Luxray. And then Therapy Energy, another interesting one. You attach it and it removes paralysis and poison, which is pretty cool. So it's essentially just like a special condition remover and an energy at the same time. It'll definitely be an interesting inclusion for like Lugia, going back to a more so colorless based build. Could definitely see that becoming relevant. And with the new Wigglytuff as well in this set, you can effectively just attach a therapy energy from hand for a turn with its ability, and then still have your energy attachment for turn. So it could be an interesting way maybe for like Arceus to be able to cheat out and go like, hey, attach therapy energy, attach DTE, use Trinity Nova, even if you missed your attachment for turn the previous turn. Not saying that's going to be a deck, but it is definitely an interesting tool to be able to play around with. Or getting Charm of Courage, which is effectively just a reprint of Cape of Toughness. It gives a basic Pokemon 50 extra health. The reason this isn't just a straight up reprint of Cape of Toughness though, there's no limitation. So it doesn't say it can be attached to a GX Pokemon or EX Pokemon. It can just go on any basic Pokemon. This one, I definitely see seeing quite a bit of play. Being able to use it on things like Blissey V, being able to use it on like Chin Pows, your Raichu Vs, stuff like that, like things that normally wouldn't be able to take much of a hit. If you can put them into 2-shot range instead of 1-shot range, that's definitely going to win some games. And I can see it being a playable card into the future and just the entire time this card's in rotation. We did get reprints of Super Rod and Superior Energy Retrieval, so if you don't already have copies of these cards, definitely pick them up in this set. They're great recovery cards. Super Rod's going to be amazing for single prize cards. Since Ordinary Rod rotated, we need some sort of item recovery. All that we had at the moment was Clara and Miriam to get Pokemon back from the discard pile, and yeah, that sucked. That really sucked. So I'm glad that we've got this back. You get to do a combination of up to 3 cards, being either energy or Pokemon, or any combination in there as you'd like. And Superior Energy Retrieval, you're going to discard 2 cards from your hand and then get 4 energy cards back from the discard pile. So just a great way to be able to reset your hand. Decks like Chin Pow, where you want a bunch of energy in hand to accelerate out, or Cherim, for example, where you want a bunch of basic energy, they're going to thrive off that card. All right, and the next cards we're going to cover are cards that could potentially be good techs to have around. Not saying rush out the door to pick these up. These are more so like if you want to buy everything that might see play, pick these up. If you pull them from packs, hang on to them. I know I'm going to be picking them up just to kind of have them because they do seem like interesting tools to be able to build with, but I'm not saying they're going to be top tier cards, at least not right out of the door. First one being Fortress EX. I'll be honest, I hate this card, but it does have some definite potential to it. So Fortress EX, it's effectively like the old Electro GX we had. You discard it. It's a 2-prize Pokemon, so you're giving up 2 prizes to your opponent, which is a little bit risky, but with comeback cards like Iono and Roxanne in rotation, there's situations where giving up prizes could be helpful. And then you get to search your deck for 5 grass energy and attach them to your Pokemon in any way that you like. So it's a great way to set up attackers. We don't have a lot of amazing grass attackers at the moment, but in the future, if we get one, or we get one that's very control based, I could see Fortress becoming, well, a bit of a force to reckon with. At the moment, though, I don't know. I don't really see a lot of merit to it, but it's definitely one of those cards that it's not a bad idea to have it, because in the future, maybe a year or 2 down the road even, it could see a lot of play. Other one being Abomasnow. Its ability just stops healing from occurring for yourself and your opponent. So it is a bit of a double-edged sword. We're going into mostly the 2-shot format. Decks like Goodra are seeing play. In this set, we're getting Cooperajah, which also tanks hits, and I'm thinking is going to be pretty bulky, and can see healing becoming kind of a standard thing in the format. So having a card like Abomasnow isn't a bad idea, especially just hanging on to a copy or 2. It's a stage 1, so you could include it in like Zorobox decks and just switch into it, or even just having it as a 1/1 line in decks isn't a bad call. Next up, we've got Oricorio. It's got an ability that just lets you heal 20 damage from your active Pokemon as long as it's an evolution Pokemon. So as we just mentioned, healing could become a thing. With this too, it doesn't say you can only use one Oricorio a turn. So if you wanted to have Gudra sitting in the active, it uses Rolling Iron, takes 80 less damage during the next turn, gets hit, maybe it only takes 100 damage. You go, okay, that's cool. 4 Oricorios, heal off 80 of that damage, just kind of like smile and wave at your opponent and repeat. It's a little bit silly, and I could definitely see it becoming a deck. Bit of a fringe thing though, something you probably just have 1 or 2 copies of it. You could go for 4 if you really want to go invested into it, but also just being able to get yourself out of breakpoint numbers is the main idea of this card. Also going to be getting a copy of the Pelipper lineup. If you went to pre-releases, there was a pre-release promo of the Pelipper, and you would have got, well, 2-2 line of it out of there. So if you did, hey, you're set. If not, though, getting some Pelipper isn't a bad idea. When you evolve up into it, it's got an ability that's effectively like Luminion V or BS Seeker. You can search your deck for a supporter card, or you can get a supporter card back from your discard pile and just put it into your hand. It's a great way to just be able to sit there and go, hey, I have a Wingull on my bench. I need boss for game next turn, and then it forces your opponent to either deal with that Wingull because you might have an out to the supporter you need, or you just get the supporter you need. Definitely an interesting card to play around with. Being on a stage 1 though, instead of on a basic Pokemon like Luminion V, is a little bit of a trade-off, but you are only giving up 1 prize for it, is kind of the benefit of it. The deck space taken up though, I'm not 100% if it's going to be justified, so in decks it probably would just be a 1-1 or a 2-2 line, so you don't need to go and get like a full 4-4 playset of this card. And I know I did mention earlier I recommend picking up playsets of all stadiums in all sets. This one though, the stadiums, they're okay. So we're getting Wilderness of Disaster and Snowy Mountain of Disaster. Wilderness of Disaster is going to increase the retreat cost of basic non-fighting Pokemon by 1. It's very specific, so evolution Pokemon aren't affected by this, and that's why it's kind of like a potentially it's a tech. Like it does obviously hurt Lost Box. They're trying to run Beach Court to reduce their retreat cost by 1, and then you just go, no, Wilderness of Disaster, I'm going to increase your retreat cost by 1. If they don't have a counter stadium, it could be pretty detrimental to them. Snow Mountain of Disaster, it's going to make it so that if you attach a energy to a non-basic water Pokemon, they take 20 damage. So similar to like Old Cemetery, except a little bit more specific. Interesting though. So it could be a great way to fix up some numbers with decks trying to accelerate out multiple energies as well. The main one's going to be Baxcalibur that's accelerating out water energy, which they're typically going to do it to basic guys. But if you're seeing things like Cherrim or even that Fortress where it's trying to accelerate energy out, they'll be taking damage for that. Actually, ignore that Fortress comment. That's coming straight from deck. It's not coming from hand, so it would ignore the effect of this stadium. We're also getting Fighting Milk. I think in the set, it's going to be called Fighting Olay, but the translation on this is just going with Fighting Milk. If you're behind on prizes, you can use this card and you just get to heal, I think it's 50 damage, 60 damage, which is pretty cool. So another one of those things, it definitely seems like we're hitting towards a 2-shot format with healing becoming a main factor of it. So being able to get these healing cards, it's going to be good. Decks like Lost Zone Gudra as well, if they're killing like a Comfey or something early in the game, they've taken a prize, it's kind of like, okay, cool. Gudra's not one-shotting into big guys. You're half hitting into them. You half hit into them. They do a little bit of damage to you. You just heal it off with this. It's definitely an interesting concept to have and could be a worthwhile card to pick up. Other one's going to be Grusha. So the other supporter cards we mentioned seem pretty powerful. Grusha seems powerful, but very specific. So it lets you draw until you have 5 cards in hand. But if none of your Pokemon have energy attached to them, you get to draw until you have 7 cards in hand, which is actually kind of sweet. With decks like Chin-Pao, you're going to be accelerating out a bunch of water energy. You're going to be discarding it from your Pokemon after that. Then you have no energy in play. So you could theoretically use Grusha and get the full draw 7 effect off it, which is pretty solid. There's also decks that you just don't need to attach a lot of energy in a turn. So maybe you're only needing to attach 1 energy for turn to get an attack off. Being able to run Grusha as your supporter card in those so that you're not having to discard cards to draw 7 cards, it's pretty solid. I'm not saying it's going to be a top tier card. Picking up a playset of this wouldn't be a bad call out. Next one we're getting into though is more so deck specific. First one is essentially just the Chin-Pao package. You're going to want to get a 3-1-3 line of Baxcalibur at the minimum. Going for like a 4-1-4 lineup of it, I'm not too sure you'd need it since we have cards like Arita to kind of just guarantee that you get that water Pokemon and the rare candy to evolve up into it. So we're going more so towards search cards to get these cards out. You don't need to run as heavy of a lineup. If you want to pick up a 4-1-4 line though, just to be safe, it's not a bad call. Also going to recommend getting 2 to 4 Chin-Pao. 3 seems kind of like the sweet spot for the deck, so its ability is just when it's in the active. Search your deck for 2 water energy, which combines amazingly with Baxcalibur, and you'd effectively need it to build this deck. The other two cards I'm going to recommend picking up for the deck, not saying they're 100% going to be included in builds, but they could be interesting cards to play around with. One being the new Ice Cube, that for 3 water energy, you do 100 damage, and then on your next turn, you take 100 less damage. It could be helpful into like single prize matchups where you're not needing to do massive numbers to be able to take knockouts. Just something to consider. After it attacks, it has 210 HP effectively, so it's difficult for them to deal with. This could be your counter to Lost Box potentially. It's definitely an interesting idea to play around with, and it's more so one of those cards. If you happen to pull it, don't throw it in the bulk bin. Picking one up, it's not going to hurt the bank though either. I think it'll probably be like a 25-cent card to be realistic. And I would recommend picking up 2 copies of Snowy Mountain of Disaster just to help fix up some numbers. So Chin Pao's damage is scaling up by 60, which means if you're using 5 energy, you're doing 300 damage. You're just shy of taking out VMAX cards. If you have Snow Mountain of Disaster in play, for example, if Mew attaches a double turbo energy, all of a sudden they only have 290 HP left. You only need 5 energy to knock them out. It's just a great way to be able to break some, well, breakpoint numbers and could be very helpful for you. You're going to want to counter Stadium for Path to the Peak, so it's definitely an interesting idea to look into for that. Other cards that I think might have high potential to be decks, again, not immediately, but in a set or two, I could definitely see these being effective. Chuyu EX has a great attack that for 2 fire energy, you do 100 damage, search your deck for 3 fire energy, and attach them to your bench Pokemon. The fact that it's a fire Pokemon, you can be charging this up effectively your first turn by going attach for turn, Magma Base into it, get it in the active, which means if you're going second, you could be cheating out 5 energy in your first turn by using Chuyu and then just setting yourself up for a solid game. It's a little bit risky though, it doesn't have a lot of health. Bit of a trade-off, doesn't hit a lot of damage either, but as a setup Pokemon, it could be an interesting inclusion to have. So I do recommend picking them up, or if you pull them from packs, just hang on to them. Wigglytuff, this one with Pokemon 151, we're getting a Wigglytuff EX. Its attack's going to cost 3 colorless energy, and if it has special energy attached to it, it does extra damage. Wigglytuff, it'll evolve from the same Jigglypuff, so you can run it as like a split line in that. Just being able to cheat out a therapy energy with this Wigglytuff to be able to at least pay part of the attack cost, and then attach a double turbo energy and get going. It's very interesting and could be a pretty powerful Pokemon combination. Cooperage EX, I don't know if I'm just like, I got a lot of hopium for this one or what, but I think Cooperage EX is going to dethrone Goodra as the big tank Pokemon. Its ability makes it take 30 less damage from attacks. In Pokemon 151, we're also getting a tool card that makes you take 30 less damage from attacks. It's taking 60 less. And unlike Goodra, it doesn't need an attack to do that. It's just flat taking 60 less. The other nice thing, they can't go Escape Rope Boss, oh, you're taking full damage. No, the ability is still on this Pokemon. It hasn't been negated by Gust. If you build this with a Lost Box deck as well, since the attack cost is 2 steel and a colorless energy, you can be using Mirage Gate, get a steel, get something else, attach another steel for turn, get going. Pretty solid. You do 260 damage, 30 damage to each of your bench guys, but Cooperage takes 30 less from attack, so any bench Cooperage EX are just sitting there like, nah, no damage for me, please. It's a little bit silly. It's an evolution Pokemon too, so you could use Cheryl to fully heal it. And if you were building it in a Lost Box deck, once you get enough things in the Lost Zone, you could use Fantina, take another 120 less damage from Pokemon V, effectively being able to take, that's what, 180 less if you have that tool card from Pokemon 151 in play as well. I've got high hopes for Cooperage, that's all I'm going to say. As well as Tinglu EX, so its ability is just going to shut off abilities from Pokemon that have damage counters on them, excluding Pokemon EX. So it's a great way to shut down decks like, well, Lost Box, ping all their Comfies, they can't get anything in the Lost Zone. Excalibur, just ping it, they can't accelerate energy out. It seems like a good card to me. Its attack only does 150 damage, but it is a fighting Pokemon, so you could be using Grant to bump that up to 180 and get into 2-shot range of everything, which is nice. And it does cost 3 fighting to use it though, but you could be combining it with like Koraidon EX and just cheat energy out on your first turn. It's definitely an interesting card to keep an eye on, and there will definitely be some decks featuring it. I'd say pick these up while they're cheap before someone finds a way to break them and they become top tier all of a sudden. But that's just my view on these cards. It's entirely my own opinion. Could be completely wrong, but definitely worth looking into. These other cards are also deck specific, so it's mostly just if you're interested in these decks, pick these up. There's going to be the Wings of Union line, so the Flamigo, Wattrel, and Murkrow. You're going to need a playset of each of those. For each one that's in the discard, you're going to do 20 damage. It's pretty solid. Cut them all in the bin, you're doing 240. Use Ditto, hit 240, maybe play a King Gambit, bump up the attack cost of basic Pokemon by another 30. There could be a deck there. Noivern EX would be a great inclusion for Regidrago V-Star. Bellibolt EX definitely seems like a deck in itself, just being able to paralyze your opponent. It'll be frustrating to play against, but there's definitely a deck in there. Tinkaton EX and the new Tinkaton will both combine into a great deck. Tinkaton EX doing extra damage for each card in your hand, and then the other Tinkaton being able to discard a card and draw 3 cards. It's a nice way to set up that hand. I would recommend picking these both up as a 4/4 line because, well, with you wanting a bunch of cards in your hand, you're probably not going to run much Pokemon Search. You'd just be running a lot of draw power cards. So things like Zinnia, things like this Tinkaton, probably go for a Gardevoir line and use the Curlius to discard cards and draw into more cards. It'll be solid. You'd be more so looking at Pokemon Recovery more so than Pokemon Search and just discarding as many things as you can to get into a big hand and then recovering them back. Like run a bunch of Super Rods or run a bunch of Miriam, put all those Pokemon back into your deck, draw more cards. It'll be kind of scary and definitely a deck I'm excited to play around with. Slowking, it looks like an interesting control deck, so if that's your style of play, definitely look into that card. And the new Charcadet we got does have 80 HP, whereas the previous ones only had 60 and 70. So if you're playing any decks running Charcadet, this is the one you're going to want to pick up to just kind of replace those other ones. And last but not least, if you're a fan of GLC, there's some interesting cards coming out of this set for it. So the Baxcalibur line, definitely pick up a 1/1/1 line of that. It's effectively just Deluge Blastoise, but now you can have a secondary line of it in your decks. Why wouldn't you? Just swap out that Frostmoth for it. The Wingull Pelipper will definitely be an interesting inclusion for colorless decks, effectively just giving you, well, more supporter search or great options for control-based decks if you want to go for that. And the new Dunsparce as well, just being able to go 100 damage, paralyze them, bounce back into your deck. If you're running Porygon Z where you can just accelerate out a bunch of special energies or Archeops to do it, the Dunsparce can consistently get set up, paralyze your opponent, not take one-shots, and just kind of buy you a bit of time. Could be an interesting inclusion in those decks. The Tinkaton lineup also seems like a great call out for Psychic decks, and then Orthworm seems like an absolute beast for Steel decks. It's got 130 HP. If you've got 3 or more Steel energy, another 100 HP, bringing it up to 230, slap a Cape of Toughness or a Charm of Courage on there, give it another 50, brings it up to 280. It's just going to be a pain to deal with. Does 100 damage, 30 to 1 to their bench guys. So you're going to be like not quite one-shotting big things, but like basic Pokemon you can knock out and then set up damage onto bench guys to then, when they evolve, still take them out. It's going to be a great card for Gym Leader Challenge. And if you're after the full buy list, there it is for you right there on the screen right now. I've got numbers just as rough counts for what I would recommend picking up. Again, this is fully just my opinion, not saying you need every one of these cards. The ones where it was deck specific, you're not really going to want to need those. It's more so just the staple cards at the beginning. And then if there's specific decks you're looking into, definitely worth picking up. There's a few cards on here that I do notice I didn't have on previous screens. The Clodsire lineup, unfortunately, I did forget to mention earlier, and the other Stadium card that it's actually going to boost the attack cost of your Stage 1 Pokemon by 10. Could be relevant. If there's some Pokemon that are just hitting shy of knockout numbers, just being able to boost it that little bit will be helpful. Stage 1 Pokemon on EXs it counts. V-Stars and V-Max Pokemon are not considered Stage 1 Pokemon though, so do keep that in mind. That's it though. What do you guys think? Is you're gonna pick up all the cards on this list, or do you have some different ideas of what you should go after for Paldea Evolved? Let me know in the comments down below, and till next time, take care of yourself.